She was stolen from a burning village as a baby, raised by the very man who ordered the massacre. Now, on the eve of her royal wedding, the truth explodes. She's not a symbol of peace. She's the last heir of the people her kingdom tried to erase. Torn between two worlds, Elaira must choose: return to the throne built on lies, or fight for the freedom of the blood that runs in her veins. This story is about betrayal, identity, and the courage to rewrite your destiny. If you believe the truth is worth fighting for, comment, "Truth will rise." In the opulent heart of Castle Valenros, the air shimmered with celebration. Golden banners bearing the crest of Vaildor hung from towering stone arches. Laughter, music, and the scent of roasted pheasant filled the great hall as nobles clinked goblets, their velvet sleeves brushing one another like feathers in flight. Lady Elaira stood on the balcony above the gathering, her slender hands gripping the carved marble rail. The wind played softly with the silver veil that crowned her dark auburn hair, the sheer fabric cascading over a gown of moonlight silk, a symbol of purity, of promise. Her eyes, wide and calm, like still water, looked out over the feasting lords and ladies below. Somewhere in the corner, the court minstrel played the old Vaildorian hymn of unity, and near the long table where the nobility dined, Duke Tharion raised his goblet in a toast. "To Lady Elaira," he declared, his voice deep and commanding, though hollow beneath the bravado. "The Virgin of the Realm, the bridge between two worlds. Tomorrow she will be not only my bride, but the soul of peace itself." Cheers followed, loud and dutiful. Elaira smiled, not from joy, but obligation. Her fingers trembled slightly at the cold metal of the railing, unseen by all but the night wind. 1,000 times she had been told this was her destiny, to save a kingdom not with a sword, but with her silence, her obedience, her womb. Her eyes searched the horizon, but all she saw were the torch-lit walls of her golden cage. That night, as the feast continued and the guests drank deep into sleep, Elaira retreated to her chambers, where maids braided her hair and laid silks over her wedding bed. Somewhere in the castle, Tharion prepared his vows. Somewhere in the village below, bells had already begun to ring, but none of them heard the distant thunder that rolled not from sky, but earth. Just past midnight, a howl shattered the silence, not of a wolf, but of war. The castle gates, once thought impenetrable, splintered beneath the force of charging beasts in leather and bone. The northern clans, wild and forgotten, poured into the courtyard with axes and fire. Soldiers barely had time to raise alarm before the killing began. Elaira rushed to the window, heart pounding against her ribs. Flames licked the lower walls, and black silhouettes moved like phantoms through the blaze. The music had stopped. The bells now rang in agony. A maid burst through her door, pale with terror. "Milady, run! The Northmen!" A shadow fell across the doorway. Steel flashed. The maid collapsed. Elaira gasped, stumbling back, her bare feet slipping against polished stone, and then she saw him. A mountain of a man stepped forward, shoulders broad as the doorway, cloaked in furs streaked with soot and blood. His skin bore the marks of battle, old wounds, thick scars, tribal tattoos that curled over muscle like ancient runes. His hair, dark and unkempt, clung to his face in the sweat of war. But it was his eyes that made her still. Eyes not wild, but aching, not cruel, but ancient. The eyes of a man who had seen everything burn, Ravok, the beast of the north. For a moment, they stared at one another in silence. Two souls bound not by fate, but fire. Then, in a voice that growled more than it spoke, he said, "You don't belong here." Before she could scream, before she could move, the world turned black. And by dawn, Lady Elaira, the Virgin of the Realm, had vanished. Elaira woke to the sharp bite of wind and the creaking rhythm of hooves pounding through snow. Her head throbbed as if split in two, and when she tried to move, pain shot through her shoulders. Her arms were bound, wrists raw from rope. The world around her blurred, trees streaking past, white branches like reaching fingers in the moonlight. She was on horseback, thrown over the saddle like spoils. Her gown, once glowing white and embroidered with pearls, was ripped and stained with ash. Her hair clung to her face, tangled and damp with melting snow, the cold carved into her skin, relentless and silent. Above her, stars blinked through the skeletal arms of the forest. Her breath came out in short, visible gasps. She turned her head slowly, dizzy, and caught glimpses of them, the riders, barbarians. Their silhouettes were dark and brutal, cloaked in thick pelts and armor forged not for decoration, but survival. No banners, no colors, just primal movement and the hiss of weapons strapped to their backs. The one nearest to her, the one who had taken her, rode at the front. Ravok, even from behind, he radiated command. His massive shoulders rolled with each stride of his warhorse. A heavy axe lay across his back. He hadn't spoken since the castle. He hadn't looked at her. Hours passed. Eventually, the trees gave way to jagged cliffs and winding passes. Snow deepened, and the horses struggled. Elira's body numbed beneath the frost, and her mind began to fray at the edges. The chill was no longer just cold, it was eating her. "Please," she croaked, voice weak and raw. "Please." No one responded. Then, without warning, Ravok raised a fist, and all riders slowed. He dismounted. His boots crunched the snow as he came toward her. Her heart thudded violently. Was this it? Was he going to kill her now, in the middle of nowhere? He said nothing. He unfastened her ropes and pulled her gently, too gently, from the saddle. She collapsed into the snow, too weak to scream. He caught her before she hit the ground. Up close, his scent was earth and smoke. His arms were impossibly warm. "You'll freeze," he muttered, half to himself, then lifted her as easily as a feather and turned toward a small crevice in the rock face. Hidden behind snow-draped branches was a narrow passage leading into a shelter carved by time and ice. The others dismounted as well, tending to horses, unpacking supplies with grim efficiency. No one looked at her. No one touched her. Inside the cave, there was a fire already burning, built by some who had ridden ahead. He placed her beside it, then threw a fur over her body. She lay curled like a child, trembling, still too dazed to speak. He crouched beside her, unstrapped a water skin from his belt, and pressed it to her lips. She flinched. He waited. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, quietly, almost like it pained him to admit. She opened her eyes and stared at him. Those eyes, still that same fierce, ancient gaze, but now they were softer, confused, as if he hadn't expected her to survive this long, or maybe he hadn't expected to care. You murdered them," she whispered. His jaw clenched. "I spared more than I should have. You burned my home." He looked into the flames, not at her. "No, I burned your prison." She closed her eyes, unable to hold back the hot tears that carved paths down her frozen cheeks. "Why? Why take me?" He didn't answer. That night, the cave was silent, save for the occasional crack of firewood and the wind howling beyond the stone walls. Elira drifted in and out of restless sleep. She heard voices outside, harsh whispers in a language not her own. Sometimes they said her name. Sometimes they said Vaildor. But no one entered, no one touched her. She dreamt of fire and blood, of her mother's voice singing lullabies, of Duke Tharion's cold hand on her shoulder as he told her, "You were born for this." She woke to another day of snow, and then another and another. They traveled further north, deeper into the Frostlands. She rode now wrapped in furs, her wrists unbound. She was watched, but not leashed. Each night they stopped at hidden camps, built into caves, valleys, abandoned forts swallowed by ice. It was a world she never knew existed, a world erased from the maps of Vaildor. The people here did not bow. They did not smile. They lived like wolves, wounded, sharp, protective, but they weren't monsters. She saw it in the way one of the warriors cradled his injured son, in how the women shared their stew with the elders first. in the silence of morning around the fire, when one rider didn't return, and in Ravok, the way he never let her grow cold again. She never saw him sleep. He kept watch at night, sharpening his blade, speaking only when necessary. But once, when she stirred near the fire and found him sitting beside her, she dared to ask, "Why am I still alive?" His answer was quiet. "Because you don't know who you are." Her heart stilled. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer, but she heard whispers now, at the edge of fires, behind closed doors. She doesn't know. She was raised by them. They lied to her. At first, she thought they were talking about someone else, but their stares lingered too long, their words too deliberate. Then came the moment she couldn't ignore. She was standing outside the longhouse of the elders, a gathering tent of stone and bone, when she heard it clearly. Two women, speaking in their native tongue. One looked at her with pity. "She wears the face of the old blood," she said. "She does not know," the other replied. "Then it will destroy her when she learns." That night, Elira sat by the fire, staring into the flames. She waited, and as if summoned by her thoughts, Ravok approached and knelt beside her. He offered her a bowl of hot broth. She didn't take it. "Tell me," she said. His eyes narrowed. "Tell you what?" "The truth. What am I not supposed to know?" He was silent. The fire crackled between them. "You owe me," she said. "You took me. You destroyed everything I knew. So tell me why." Ravok looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and nodded for her to follow. He led her away from the camp, past the outer sentries, up a ridge where the trees gave way to open sky. The moon hung low, casting silver light across a ruined stone monument, ancient, broken, covered in moss and ice. "This was once a temple," he said, "before Vaildor claimed the land. Before your duke signed a treaty with fire and blood." She turned toward him, her voice shaking. "You keep speaking in riddles. Why me? Why now?" He stepped closer, and for the first time, his voice trembled. "Because 20 years ago, your duke burned an entire village to the ground, a northern settlement. He called it war, but it was a massacre. Children, women, elders, all of them." Her breath caught. "There was one survivor," Ravok said, his voice now barely above the wind. "A boy who watched his mother die, who dug himself from the ash. That boy grew into me." Elira stared at him, heart racing. "And you took me for revenge?" "No," he said. "I took you because you were there." She froze. He reached into his coat and pulled something wrapped in leather, a small pendant, cracked and scorched. He held it up to the moonlight. "I found this in the ruins. A name inscribed in the back, El." Her hands went numb. "My mother was a healer. She tried to save a baby, a girl brought in by southern soldiers, not northern. The child survived, but she was taken." Elira shook her head, but something inside her cracked. Her breath came short. Her knees gave. "No, that's not possible. You were never meant to be Vaildorian," Ravok said softly. "You were one of us." The silence between them was vast. Only the wind dared to speak. She fell to the ground, eyes wide, chest heaving. All her life, her titles, her duties, her bloodline had been built on this idea of unity, on her birthright. But now, everything was ash, and Ravok, the savage she had been taught to fear, was the only one who had shown her truth. He crouched beside her, not to command, not to comfort, but to wait. And there, under a sky of frozen stars, Lady Elira began to see, not as a princess, not as a prisoner, but as someone finally waking up. The days that followed unraveled Elira's soul like a threadbare tapestry. Each morning, she awoke expecting the world to return to what it had been, for the veil of her past to fall back into place, for the certainty of her identity to reclaim her like a forgotten name. But it never came. Instead, she awoke to silence, to cold wind rattling through wooden beams, to the low murmurs of people who no longer saw her as a prisoner, but something else. A question wrapped in silk and snow. Her movements were no longer shadowed by armed guards, though eyes still followed her, curious, wary, and in some cases reverent. She spent her days walking the paths of the hidden village, nestled in the hollow of a frozen mountain valley. It was a place carved from stone, bone, and resilience. The homes were modest, built with the remnants of trees too stubborn to die. Children darted between huts, laughter quick and fleeting like birdsong, and elders sat by fire pits, mending clothes and whispering stories that seemed to span generations. Elira had expected savagery. Instead, she found a people clinging to culture in the face of extinction. They did not bow to her, but they watched. And occasionally, when they thought she wasn't listening, they spoke her name, not with contempt, but wonder. She was a puzzle that didn't fit, a flower growing in the snow, and though she didn't know it yet, she had already begun to change. The nightmares came with the night. She saw flames licking castle walls, blood on the ballroom floor, Duke Tharion's voice echoing like a bell made of bone. "You were born for this. You are peace. You are property." And then the whisper of Ravok's voice, cutting through the dream like a knife through silk. "You don't know who you are." One night, unable to sleep, she found herself outside the longhouse of the council. Inside, old warriors and wise women sat in a circle, their faces etched with stories of loss. They didn't invite her in, but they didn't turn her away either. She stood just outside the ring of firelight and listened. A woman named Arasha spoke. She had hair like silver threads and a voice that rumbled with quiet storms. "The girl is not of them," she said. "Not by blood." "Not yet," someone countered. "Blood does not make one of us. Choice does. She does not belong to Vaeldor," Arasha said firmly. "But she may not belong to us either. She is between." A pause. And then the most unexpected voice answered from the shadows behind her. "She belongs to herself." Elira turned. Ravok stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her without surprise. It was as if he had known she'd come, as if he always knew. She stepped aside as he entered the circle, and the elders made space for him without a word. He was not just their warrior. He was something else, a symbol of all they had lost and all they still dared to hope for. But he didn't sit. He turned toward the flames, staring into them as if he could see the past there, flickering and burning. "I remember the screams," he said. "I was 5. I remember the smell of smoke in my hair. I remember hiding under the floorboards while the soldiers stepped over my mother's body." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. They said there were no survivors, that we were savages, that peace could only be forged through the blood of the forgotten. And now the crown calls that treaty sacred, built on the union of a duke and a virgin. He turned his head slightly, looking toward Elira. But the virgin was never one of theirs. She was one of us, taken, raised behind golden bars. A sharp intake of breath traveled through the room. Elira stepped into the light. "You're saying I'm, what, a northern child?" Her voice cracked, half in disbelief, half in something more dangerous. "A hunger to know." Ravok nodded. "You were rescued from the fire, a baby. We thought you had died, but the soldiers, they kept you." Arasha rose from her seat and crossed the space slowly. In her hand, she held something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it and revealed a pendant, old, scorched, and shaped like a tear. On the back, faint but still legible, were 2 letters etched into the metal. E.L. Elira's knees gave out, and she sank to the ground. She reached for the pendant with trembling fingers. It was warm from Arasha's hand. "I wore this," she whispered, "when I was small, before the palace made me wear the sigil of Vaeldor." "It was your mother's," Arasha said. "She died protecting the last hope she had." Elira closed her fingers around it and pressed it to her chest. Everything inside her, the teachings, the expectations, the royal bloodlines, began to crack. There was no collapse, no sudden rage, only silence, a stillness so complete it felt like drowning. That night, Ravok stood outside her hut. He didn't knock, he didn't speak, he simply waited, like a mountain waits for the storm. Eventually, she stepped out into the snow and faced him. "You could have told me the first night," she said. "You wouldn't have believed me," he replied. "I still don't." "I know." They stared at one another. The distance between them was small, but the weight of truth stretched like a canyon. "Why me?" she asked. "Why take me from the castle?" His jaw flexed. "Because if you married Tharion, the lie would live forever. The North would be buried, forgotten, and you would become the crown's puppet." She clenched her fists. "You used me. I freed you." The words were not gentle. They weren't cruel either. They were simply honest. She turned away, snow crunching beneath her boots. "You talk about truth like it's salvation," she said over her shoulder, "but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like being set on fire." He didn't follow her. He didn't speak again. But in the days that followed, something shifted. Elaira no longer stood apart from the villagers. She began to help, carrying buckets of water from the well, helping stitch clothing, learning to chop wood with fingers that had only known embroidery needles. The people saw it. They noticed. She wasn't pretending. She was remembering. A child inside her, the one they thought had died, was waking up. One afternoon, as she sat peeling roots with a young girl named Maya, the child asked, "Will you go back to the Golden Palace now that you remember?" Elaira paused. "I don't think I want to." "Good," the girl said simply. "You smile more here." Elaira blinked. She hadn't realized she had. That night, the village gathered for the moon rite, a northern tradition long outlawed by Vaildor. It was a ceremony of memory and mourning, a way to honor the ancestors. A great fire was built at the heart of the camp. People danced around it, chanting old songs, some laughing, others crying. Elaira stood at the edge, heart thundering. Ravok came to her side, his voice low. "This is not just about death. It's about claiming your place among the living." She looked at him, truly looked. Beneath the scars, beneath the reputation, was a man carved from pain. Yes, but also from hope. A man who had carried a kingdom's grief on his shoulders. "I don't know who I am yet," she said. "You don't need to," he replied. "But you have to choose." "Choose what?" He turned to face her fully. "To live with their lie or fight with our truth?" The flames reflected in her eyes. She stepped forward and danced, not gracefully, not like the trained ballerina of the court, but wildly, freely. Her arms reached for the sky. Her voice joined the chant. The people surrounded her, not as followers or subjects, but as kin. For the first time in her life, Elaira didn't feel watched. She felt seen. Later, alone beneath the stars, Ravok approached her once more. "You said I set you on fire," he said. She turned to him, her face flushed from dancing, her hair damp with snow. "I did," she nodded. "But maybe that's what I needed." Their eyes locked, not with fear, not with doubt, but with understanding, and something more. The night swallowed their silence, but the fire between them had only just begun. Snow fell gently on the rooftops of the northern village, soft and endless, like time itself had slowed to watch. Winter in the mountains was more than a season. It was a silence that swallowed everything. And within that silence, Elaira moved with a new weight in her steps, one that no longer came from shackles or royal silk, but from truth, from blood rediscovered, from memories that weren't her own, but lived inside the eyes of those who had survived when she was stolen away. Each morning, she rose before the sun. She joined the women who wove furs into cloaks, the boys who learned to track prints in the snow, the elders who carved names of the lost into wooden tablets. Her hands, once praised for their delicate stillness, grew rough with use. Her muscles ached from labor she had never imagined herself doing, but she never once complained. In the heart of the village, children began to greet her not as a stranger, but as Elaira. No longer the captive, no longer the southern girl, just her name. Ravok watched all of it. He didn't speak much to her during the days. He kept to his duties, training the young warriors, patrolling the edges of the forest, meeting in secret with the other northern leaders scattered across hidden territories. But he always found her in the evenings, when the fires burned low and the village quieted. He would sit near her, silent, just close enough to share the warmth. Some nights they talked, some nights they didn't need to, but every night something between them deepened. One evening, while she was sharpening a hunting blade as Arasha had taught her, she looked up and found Ravok standing over her with a bundle of cloth in his hands. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her without a word. She unwrapped it and gasped. It was a cloak, lined with wolf fur, dyed in a shade of deep crimson that seemed to catch fire in the light. The threads were embroidered with the northern sigil, the broken sun rising over 3 mountains, and in the lining, hidden but carefully stitched, were the letters E.L. "You made this," she whispered, stunned. "I commissioned it," he said. "It was meant for your mother. She never wore it." Elira clutched the cloak to her chest. Her throat tightened. "It's beautiful. It's yours." She blinked back, the sting in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because this land is as much yours as it is mine." She stared at him. His jaw was set, his posture firm, but something behind his expression trembled, like even he wasn't certain why he cared so much, or maybe he knew and feared what it meant. That night she wore the cloak, not because she needed its warmth, but because for the first time it felt like armor, not made of gold, not made of obedience, but of memory. It was during the late hours, with the village quiet and the wind howling low, that she wandered toward the cliffside where Ravok often kept watch. She found him there, seated on a flat stone, looking down at the forested valley that stretched endlessly below. She sat beside him, the fur of her new cloak brushing his arm. "I don't sleep well anymore," she said after a while. He nodded slowly. "Neither do I. I keep seeing the castle burning. But in the dream, I'm not afraid. I'm watching, like I let it happen." Ravok didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Maybe part of you wanted it to burn." She looked at him sharply but couldn't deny the truth of it. "Is that terrible?" "No," he said. "Sometimes we need to watch things fall before we can understand why they never stood right in the first place." They sat in silence, the snow falling around them like ash. "Did you ever love anyone?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself. Ravok was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My brother." Elira turned to him. "He was older, stronger, smarter. He taught me how to hold a blade, how to hunt, how to speak to the elders without fear. He died during the burning, tried to protect our mother." His voice didn't break, but she could feel the fracture in it. "I saw it happen. I couldn't move. I just watched." She reached out and placed a hand gently on his. He didn't pull away. "You survived," she said. "I did," he murmured. "But sometimes surviving feels like betrayal." "No," she said firmly, "it's resistance." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, wordless, raw, undeniable. A tether tightening, a flame deepening. She leaned in before she realized it, or maybe he did. Their foreheads touched, breath to breath. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "Neither do I," he replied. But then their lips met, slowly, carefully, like neither of them had kissed in years, like they didn't know how, but couldn't stop themselves. It was not the firestorm she had feared. It was heat in winter, a truth too big to speak. They pulled away only when breath ran out, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. When she returned to her hut, she couldn't sleep. Her skin still burned where his fingers had touched her, and for the first time, her dreams were not of fire or war or voices commanding her to be something. She dreamt of Ravok's voice, of his hands, of freedom. But peace, she would soon learn, is a fragile thing. The scouts returned 3 days later. Elira stood at the edge of the camp as Ravok listened to their hurried words. One of them was bleeding from the arm, a clean slice that told of a trained blade. "South Patrol," the scout said. 5 men, royal armor, Valdorian crest." Elira felt her heart tighten. "They're close," the scout continued, tracking, probably looking for her. Ravok turned slowly to Elira. They know where you are. She nodded. She'd been expecting this, dreading it. They won't stop, she said. They'll keep coming. Then we have to leave, one of the elders said. We can't protect her and the village. No, Illyra said suddenly, voice firm. You shouldn't run. They all looked at her. You've been running your entire lives, she continued. Hiding, surviving, waiting for someone to speak for you. But what if you spoke for yourselves? Spoken like a royal, someone muttered. She turned to the voice. No, spoken like someone who's seen what fear does. It turns truth into silence. The fire in her eyes startled them. I'm not running, she said. Not again. That night, she sat with Ravok in the longhouse. The map of the surrounding land was spread across the table, heavy stones holding down the curling edges. He traced a path with his finger, through the mountains, toward the river, across into the flatlands. If we evacuate, we can get the children and elders out in a day, he said. The rest can follow. Illyra shook her head. What happens when they catch up? When they see smoke and tracks in the snow, Ravok's eyes were hard. Then we fight. Her heart raced. Will they believe me? If I speak in the open, accuse Tharion of lies, of burning your village? He looked at her, and something passed over his face. Sorrow, maybe, or doubt. Not unless you do it publicly, he said, with proof, and with me at your side. She studied him. That means revealing everything. It does, even us. His voice softened. Especially us. A long silence. Then she smiled, faint but real. Then we tell the world. They stood that night on the ridge once more. Snow still fell, but it didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like a beginning. And as dawn approached, a single flame burned atop the watchtower, the signal to every village still hidden in the wild north. The Virgin of the Realm would no longer be silent, and she was not alone. The valley had never been so quiet. Snow blanketed the world like a shroud, muffling even the breath of the wind. Smoke no longer curled gently from the huts. The fires had been extinguished, the paths swept clean, and the villagers scattered. What remained of the once bustling settlement were only footprints, deliberately misleading trails that vanished beneath fresh snowfall and the tricks of terrain. Illyra stood in the center of the now abandoned square, her crimson cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders, the wolf fur framing her face. She looked at the longhouse, its doors shut, its hearth cold. This was the home she had come to claim, and now she was leaving it to protect it. Behind her, Ravok approached without sound, as if the snow bent to his will. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight, the skin around his knuckles pale as he gripped the hilt of his axe. They'll be here before dusk, he said. She nodded, eyes still fixed ahead. Then we give them a reason to regret coming. He looked at her, truly looked. The girl he had stolen from a palace, who had screamed and cursed him, was gone. In her place stood a woman who chose to fight, not because she had nothing to lose, but because she had everything to reclaim. They were not alone. Warriors from the other hidden settlements had arrived under the cover of night. Cloaked men and women from frost-bitten ravines, snow-blasted plains, and mountain hollows. Not many, but enough. Some were seasoned fighters. Others were farmers, hunters, messengers. Each of them carried scars. Each of them had lost someone to the southern armies, and now each of them stood behind Ravok and beside Illyra. The plan was simple. Hide the vulnerable. Leave only a skeleton force to defend the valley's entrance. But more than swords and blades, they had one weapon that could destroy an empire: the truth. When the army arrived, it did not do so quietly. Horns sounded through the mountain pass, like the growl of a beast waking from slumber. Flags of Veldor whipped in the wind, black and gold against a backdrop of ice. The soldiers wore shining armor, their helmets polished, their formations disciplined. They marched like they expected surrender. At their center rode Duke Tharion. Illyra watched him approach from the ridge above, her breath caught between fury and fear. He looked unchanged, still regal, still arrogant, his white stallion cutting through the snow like a dagger. His cloak bore the seal of the crown. His sword glinted in the pale sun. He had come not to negotiate, not to parley, but to retrieve his bride. The soldiers reached the edge of the village. They stopped at the open gates. All was still. Then, from the far end of the square, Elira stepped forward alone. Gasps rippled through the ranks. Even from a distance, Tharion could see the red cloak, the wolf fur, the way she held her head high. She was not dressed as a captive. She did not carry chains, and yet she bore herself like someone about to break one. He raised his hand and spurred his horse forward, stopping just feet from her. "Elira," he called, voice smooth and loud enough for all to hear. "You're safe now. Come with me. This place is no longer fit for you." She didn't flinch. "Is that what you told the village you burned 20 years ago? That it wasn't fit for survival?" Whispers shot through the soldiers behind him. Tharion's expression hardened. "This is not the time for confusion," he said. "These people have clearly filled your head with... They told me the truth." She interrupted. "You destroyed a northern village, called it justice, called it order. You called it peace when it was a massacre." A muscle jumped in his cheek. "You speak as if you know what happened." "I was there," she said. "A baby, stolen, raised by you, used by you." The crowd murmured louder now. Tharion's horse shifted beneath him, unsettled by the energy in the air. "Elira," he said, quieter now, a warning beneath the name. "Come here. I won't ask again." She stepped closer. "No," she said, "I won't be your symbol anymore. I won't marry into silence, and I will not return to a palace built on ashes." He drew his sword. "I gave you everything," he hissed. "I raised you, protected you, honored you. You shaped me into your puppet," she snapped. "But you never broke me." And then the trap was sprung. From the ridge above, Ravok gave the signal. Suddenly, warriors appeared from the snow-draped cliffs, from the trees, from behind broken stone walls. Not to strike, but to show that they were not afraid, that they were watching, that she was not alone. Elira reached into her cloak and pulled forth a parchment, cracked, aged, singed by fire. She held it high for all to see. "This," she shouted, "is a copy of the original decree signed by Tharion's command, the order to erase all hostile settlements to ensure a unified peace. I found it in the ruins of the old fortress. It bears his seal." Chaos erupted. Several soldiers shouted in confusion. Some turned to their commanders. Others simply stared at the girl who had once been a symbol of their empire, now a weapon against it. Tharion stared at the document as if it were poison. "You will be silenced," he said, "before this lie spreads." And then he charged. He didn't send his army, he came himself, blade raised, fury overtaking reason. But he never reached her, because Ravok stepped between them. The clash of their weapons rang through the valley like thunder. Elira stumbled back as Ravok's axe met Tharion's sword, the shock of the impact reverberating through the stone. Tharion fought like a man possessed, all pride and desperation. Ravok fought like a storm, silent, focused, relentless. They circled one another, blades flashed, snow turned red. Every soldier, every villager watched with breath held tight. Elira watched too, helpless, praying to God she no longer believed in. Then, with a roar, Ravok knocked the sword from Tharion's hand and forced him to his knees. He stood over him, axe raised, but he didn't strike. He looked to Elira, and she understood. This was not vengeance. It was choice. She walked forward, slowly, stopping beside Ravok. She looked down at the man who had raised her, lied to her, used her. "I am not yours," she said. Then she turned her back on him. Ravok lowered his axe. The soldiers didn't move. They waited. And then, one by one, several of them dropped their swords. Others followed. The sound of steel hitting snow echoed like bells. In that moment, the battle ended. Not with blood, not with death, but with truth. The truth she had spoken. Elira stood tall, surrounded not by an army, but by people who had chosen to believe her. And as the sun broke through the clouds and touched the village for the first time in days, It felt like light had returned to the north. Later, when the wounded were tended and the soldiers disarmed, Elira and Ravok stood in the center of the square. She looked at him. "It's over." He shook his head. "No, it's only beginning." "What now?" "Now we rebuild," he said, "together." And as she reached for his hand, fingers intertwining with his, she knew this was no longer about kingdoms. It was about freedom, and she had found hers where she least expected. The first thaw came slowly. For days, the snow retreated inch by inch, revealing patches of earth beneath the white silence. The rivers began to whisper again, no longer trapped beneath ice. The trees shed their heavy burdens and stood taller, like warriors who had finally laid down their weapons. Spring was still distant, but hope had begun its quiet return. In the mountains, in the forgotten northern reaches of the world, something had changed. No longer a secret, the village now bore the attention of the entire realm. Word of what had happened, of Lady Elira's defiance, of Duke Tharion's defeat, of the truth spoken before soldiers and banners, had spread like wildfire. Some called it betrayal, others revolution, but most called it something else entirely. A beginning. The first delegation arrived within a fortnight, not from the palace, but from neighboring towns and borderland settlements that had long lived under the shadow of Vildor's rule. Small groups came, healers, scribes, merchants, even former soldiers, seeking truth, refuge, or simply to witness the place where history had turned. Elira met each one personally. No throne, no guards. She sat across from them beside the great fire in the heart of the longhouse, where the flames danced and crackled and the wind whispered stories through the open beams. Some wept when they met her, others thanked her with shaking hands. And through all of it, Ravok remained at her side, not as her protector, not as her general, but as her equal. He rarely spoke in those meetings, but when he did, people listened. They spoke of unity, not conquest, of rebuilding, not revenge. One evening, after hours of council, Elira stepped outside into the cold air. Snowflakes fell lightly, swirling in the wind. She tilted her head back, letting them kiss her face. Ravok joined her, quiet as always. He stood beside her, watching the snow fall as if it were a language he understood better than words. "I never thought peace would feel so strange," she said. He glanced at her. "It's never quiet at first. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the beginning of new ones." She turned to him, searching his eyes. "Do you regret it? Not killing him?" Ravok was silent for a moment. Then, "No, killing Tharion wouldn't have ended the lie. But letting him live to see it unravel, that was justice." She nodded slowly. "You were right. I had to choose. And you did. But there's still so much to do. They're calling me a queen now." He smirked slightly, rare and fleeting. "You are. I never wanted to be." "Neither did I." Their eyes held, and something passed between them again. No longer fire, no longer uncertainty, but a deep, steady warmth. It had started as survival, grown through fire, and now settled into something else. Love, not the kind written in royal treaties or whispered in court halls, but forged in truth, chosen in freedom. Later that week, a gathering was called. Not just the northern clans, but also the travelers, the displaced, and the disillusioned. The longhouse was too small to hold them, so they gathered beneath the open sky, where the snow had receded and the earth was dark and wet. Elira stood on a raised platform made of stone and wood, draped in the red cloak Ravok had given her, the fur collar billowing in the wind. Her hair, loose and braided with strands of silver thread, blew around her face. At her side, Ravok stood in silence, his axe resting against his back, his gaze steady. She lifted her hand, and the crowd quieted. "I was once a symbol," she said, her voice clear and full, "raised to represent peace that was never real. I wore a crown I did not earn, spoke words written for me, lived in a palace built from silence." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I am not that girl anymore. and we are not that kingdom." Murmurs of agreement moved through the crowd. Truth brought us here. Pain made us fight. But love is what will let us build. She glanced at Ravok. A love that is not submission, a love that does not chain, a love that does not erase who we are, but protects it. She stepped forward, lifting the pendant she had worn since the truth was revealed, her mother's still bearing the faintly etched letters, E.L. "I do not want to rule as they ruled," she continued. "I will not sit above you. I will walk beside you. This land is not mine to command. It is ours to protect." Cheers broke through. Not loud, not explosive, but real. When she stepped down from the platform, hands reached for hers, dirty, calloused, trembling hands that had labored, fought, survived. She held each one, looked into each pair of eyes, a people rising not under a banner, but under a promise. Later that night, she returned to her hut. The fire was low, the room dim. She removed her cloak, unbraided her hair, and stood by the window, looking out at the village below. It glowed in scattered fires and warm candlelight, alive with the quiet pulse of something growing. Ravok entered without knocking. He always knew when to come. She turned to face him. "They want to build a council," she said. "One representative from each clan, no more kings, no more thrones." He nodded. "That's what you wanted." "It is," she hesitated. "But they still want me to lead them. Not as a queen, but as something else." "What?" "A voice." He stepped closer. "Then speak. Your voice changed the world." She smiled softly. "And yours taught me how." There was no ceremony, no vow spoken in front of gods or courts. But that night, they chose each other again, not in the fire of desperation, but in the calm after the storm. When they lay together, it was not to forget the past, but to honor it. When they kissed, it was not to escape, but to belong. The wild north did not change overnight. There were still wounds, still enemies, still cold days ahead. But it was no longer a place of shadows and shame. It was a land rising from the ashes, shaped by the hands of those who had once been silenced. And at the center of it all was a woman who had been born a symbol, who had become a prisoner, and who had risen as a leader not because of her name, but because she chose to be. They called her Queen, still. Not out of tradition, but reverence. Not because she wore a crown, but because she had thrown one away, and beside her walked a man once feared by all, a savage, they called him, a beast, a shadow, but they no longer whispered his name in fear. They spoke it with awe. Ravok, not a king by blood, but by action, by fire, by love. And so the stories spread, not as legend, but as memory. That in the frozen north, where snow never melts and truth never dies, a queen who was once a prisoner ruled with the savage who stole her and gave her everything, and they called that place home. And so, sometimes the greatest power lies not in crowns or swords, but in the courage to choose your own path, even when the world has already chosen it for you. What would you have done in Elira's place? Could you turn your back on everything you were taught for the truth? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters here. And now, don't miss the next story already on your screen. Another tale of love, betrayal, and impossible choices. We'll meet you there.